Hello there. I've got my bathrobe on, and that can clearly only mean one of two things. Either I'm about to take a bath, and this doesn't look like a bathroom to me, or it's time for BS with S.A.C. The B stands for Bedtime Stories, not Bath Time Stories, despite what the robe might have you believe. When last we left off, we were reading New Tricks. We had started chapter 15, and William had found himself with a plan to get past a tricky, pivoty trap, and then he did. And he rescued someone who was injured, and used the twin bag and the bottomless bag to send her safely back to the Laughing Raven. And then he faced a real Indiana Jones style, just traps everywhere. Step on one thing and it's arrows, and another it's fire, and very dangerous and bad. But he's pretty sure there's something pretty spectacular at the end of this hallway, maybe, possibly. So let's see what happens next. The traps had become more frequent. Dead goblins and other mangled beasts littered the halls, evidence of recent battles. The danger grew almost tangible in its thickness, or rather, a week ago grew it more tangible. Now, most of the perils lurking around each and every corner had already been triggered or slain. These days, a brave adventurer or foolish farm boy might describe the dire tomb as risky or iffy. Dangerous? Perilous? Not so much. Even so, the likelihood of encountering something that used to be dangerous spiked dramatically. William would bet diamonds to copper the sword of McFinn lay on the other side of the ornate door at the far end of the hall. William carved a chunk of marble from the walls and skipped it down McFinn's big hall of death. The corridor embraced its impromptu moniker. Pillars smashed down as gouts of flame scorched and arrows flew. Blades swiped at the air. Spikes stabbed at no one. Other things that William couldn't identify but terrified him nonetheless performed equally ambiguous and potentially gruesome acts. What reached the far side of the wall was little more than ashes and charred pebbles. On the bright side, there had to be a way across. Marcus, presumably, had done it, or else William would have found the man's corpse already. Unfortunately, he had no idea how. At first, he tried carving stone plugs from the walls and floor, hoping they would keep at bay whatever nastiness each tile had in store. No good. Spikes knocked them loose, and everything else turned them into wild projectiles. He contemplated running really fast and hoping the awfulness would stay behind him, but one glance at the smoldering gravel on the other side of the gauntlet reminded him how plans like that turned out. He tried the slow and tedious approach, like he did with the lettered floors earlier, but to no avail. He could find no untrapped squares. Perhaps if he triggered 2 crushers, one on either side of him, he could step on an aerospace, knowing the stone columns would take the blow. The idea seemed solid in theory until he realized he would need to be able to press 3 tiles at once, possibly more if he hadn't scouted ahead to the next row or two. Three for the row he was on, and then another 3 to safely transition to the next row. 6 at a time. That's too many. He could try finding a safe path through, based on the variable heights that each trap triggered. For instance, one flame trap fired blazing jets at waist level, the next fired at the head, and another closer to mid-calf. He would have to chart the triggers for every single tile. With the hall stretching at least 30 feet onward, he figured a minimum of 300 tiles to test and analyze. He didn't have that kind of time. There didn't seem to be any safe way to walk across the floor, which meant there was a way past without walking. Would McFinn be the type to assume his rightful heir could fly? Sort of defeated the purpose of inheriting a magical sword if you were already magic, didn't it? But that had always been the flaw in feudalism. Power flocked to those who already had it. No worries. He would find some other, more egalitarian way across. William pulled his pole from the bag and readied his dagger. "Goodbye, my trusty friend," he said. "You served me well these past few hours, but I'm afraid I must ask you to make a great sacrifice that others might live. Also, you're just a bit of wood, so no one really cares what you think." William cut the pole cleanly into 5 pieces of 2 feet each, and whittled the ends down so they might fit in the holes in the wall. Then he placed one of his two foot pegs into the second hole up, leaned over, and placed two more as far up and as far over as he could reach. He took the other two pegs into his hands and climbed atop the first lower two, gripping the one at chest height. He leaned over, placing the fourth peg at shoulder height, again as far as he could reach. Grabbing the newest peg, he leaned low, placed the fifth, turning to retrieve the first, placing pegs to step on and collecting pegs in places they were no longer needed. Back and forth, back and forth. In this manner he crossed the most vile, deadly, nefarious, and expensive trap known to man, with a half-copper piece of wood. He hopped down from the pegs, leaving them in place for the return trip, and made his way to the great engraved door. As he had predicted, it was not locked. Back at the Drowned Rat, Ollivander stopped counting. There were 3,721 bricks in the room. Beyond the ornate doors lay a vast, nearly empty chamber with high walls and a towering dome ceiling, all covered with a stalker's tribute to the past legend. Grand murals decorated the walls depicting scenes from all periods of Macfinn's life: his birth, his childhood, awkward puberty moments, the discovery of the sword, his adventures, his triumphs, his bedchambers as seen from a tree outside the window, his conquests, heroic, geographic, and romantic, his breakfasts, and finally his demise. Above the door, tying the death and birth murals together, someone had written in precious stones a prophecy about his great return, when a chosen one would come to claim the sword and restore peace to the lands and right all wrongs, and puppies and rainbows and sunshine. Fairly cliché as far as soothsaying went, William mused, but perhaps it was old enough to have been cutting edge for its time, or at least at the peak of a prophecy trend, and not some hackneyed piece composed by a poor man's oracle claiming divine inspiration, but really producing naught but plagiarism and derivative drivel at best. Other than the murals, there were only 2.5 things in the room, all lit by a pillar of heavenly light shining down from some mysterious point in the domed ceiling. 1. A dead man lying beaten, broken, and bloody against 2. A great and ancient stone from which stuck half a sword. The corpse had a heroic build, if in a position somewhat more horizontal than expected champions of nobility and virtue to be. They also expected them to be more alive. In all other qualities, however, the corpse was every inch the hero. His arms were like pythons, thick and strong and prone to squeezing the life out of things. His abs could be used as washboards were it not for the bloodstains that clothes would develop. His jaws were wide, and yet came to a fine point at his chin. His beard was thick and bushy like a squirrel's tail, which was not heroic, but rather fashionable, and thus expected of a hero nonetheless. His mustache, while not extraordinary, at least had the decency to stick between his nose and upper lip, and not stray to some strange place, like a cheek, forehead, or the ninth realm. Though by no means an Ollivander, he still had devilishly handsome features, and would be one of the top 3 men picked by ladies for a saucy rendezvous in most of the 12 Realms taverns, which was no small boast. Such a pity, then, that he was dead. His hand rested upon the blade of half a sword, gleaming and beautiful in the torchlight. Its hilt had been crafted of gold and jewels, both precious and semi-precious, arranged to make the precious ones look so much nicer, like a diamond and its cute friend, that while pretty enough on its own, would often become overlooked when other better-cut jewels came by, looking for a hot date to a crown or a brooch. The pommel, too, radiated light and beauty, a heavenly marriage of style and substance that both protected its wielder's fingers and made them look ever so flashy and sophisticated. The blade, likewise, was a tribute to its craftsmanship, perfectly straight, shining and sharp, with an inscription in some language William had never heard of to learn. Its length sank seamlessly into the stone, which, in comparison to the corpse and blade, was quite plain in appearance and not worth mentioning, except in reference to the legendary sword sticking from it, and the long list of men who died not to pull a sword from it. Hope filled William's steps as he approached the sword and stone basking in the holy light. He knew he should take the body and return to Freeport as quickly as possible. But what harm could it do to wait 1 more minute, to pull the sword, to see if he might somehow be special after all? His hand trembled as it drifted into the warm rays shining down, filling him with a sense of reverence and respect for those who had come before and failed. He could all but hear angels singing softly. The air hummed with energy, electric and still at the same time, like tamed lightning. Mere inches away, William couldn't keep his fingers steady, though the rest of his body refused to move. He hesitated at the precipice of destiny, took a deep breath, and reached out for the sword. "Who are you, boy?" William jerked his hand back hard, nearly snapping tendons at the speed of it. The soft whisper echoed around the room, assaulting the silence from all directions. His head whipped from side to side, scanning the room for the intruder. In the blink of an eye, he drew his scimitar and dagger, ready to strike. Yet he could see no other present. His movements shifted from blazing speed to lethal slowness, careful not to overlook anyone who may have hidden in the shadows. His left hand held the dagger outstretched, while his right hand, hovering close to his face, pointed the scimitar outward, ready to stab? Scimitars weren't for stabbing. He shifted his stance, left arm still out, dagger now lying flat in the air, parallel to his torso, while the scimitar loomed behind his head, eager to slash through the bodies of its enemies. Which would have been fine if the scimitar were the better weapon. The boy was right-handed. Why should he wield the lesser blade in the hand he wasn't proficient with? He switched the weapon in his hands, but it felt wrong. The sword was heavy and awkward in his left hand, and he had no reach from his dominant side. And it didn't matter anyway, since he had no clue how to fight effectively with one weapon, let alone two. He shifted back to the left dagger parallel, right scimitar behind the head position. It wouldn't be effective, but at least it looked dangerous. "I mean you no harm, boy," the voice whispered again, dry and raspy and omnipresent, echoing from all sides. William turned in slow circles, searching for the source, but again saw no one. Could it be the ghost of McFinn, come to warn him off, to declare him unworthy? Or perhaps McFinn wanted to encourage him, to welcome him. After all, a great many chosen ones were young, unexceptionable boys until the divine hand reached out and plucked them from obscurity. Perhaps he'd been chosen after all. His stance eased. "My name is William," he said, injecting as much confidence into the words as he could find. "William," the voice replied, "will you take me with you?" "I will," he said, aglow with self-assurance as he had never known before. He was chosen, and not for some inane task like finding lost wedding rings or saving a poor farmer's chickens. He had been chosen to wield the sword of McFinn, the holy grail of legendary weapons, not to be confused with the holy grail, which was the sword of McFinn of legendary kitchenware. He reached once more for the blade, savoring the anticipation of receiving his long-foretold destiny. "Excellent," said the voice. "Could you kindly help me to my feet?" Feet? William looked down and saw the corpse reaching for him, one outstretched hand ready to tear at the boy's clothes. "Ah! Zombie!" William sprung back as far as his legs could throw him and readied his blades. His eyes focused intently on Marcus's body as his mind raced through everything he knew about zombies from campfire stories. They were animated dead. Their bite turned others into zombies, unless they were magical, in which case only a spell would create a new zombie. Of course, if they were magical, he would need fire to kill it, whereas natural zombies needed only a severe blow to the head. Otherworldly zombies, on the other hand, were not contagious, but their bites consumed souls, and they could only be destroyed through complete and total destruction of the body. There were also the various regional zombies, dependent on the realm of origin. McFinn had been born in the 7th, found the sword in the 9th, discovered the first safe route to the 12th, adventured in every known land and some lands that weren't, and hid his sword in the 6th. It could be any of a dozen types of zombies, none of which spoke, as far as he knew. Curious. "Put your blades down," Marcus said. "I'm no zombie." "That's just the sort of thing a zombie would say," William said skeptically, despite the fact that it made no sense. "No, they wouldn't. Zombies don't speak." "They would say that too." The boy knew he was wrong, but he had already committed to the reasoning and refused to back down now. "I appreciate your caution, but I'm not dead." Marcus held his hand out to the boy, a request for assistance, but William maintained his suspicious stare and lethal stance. The man shrugged, rested his hand on the rocks, and heaved himself to his feet. "What are you doing here?" William asked. "Heard rumor that the sword of McFinn lay hidden in this cave. I thought maybe if I could retrieve it, I could clean Freeport up. I had been chosen before to defend the treetop city of Oakspire from dire vultures. I thought maybe I would be chosen again. He sounded so hurt. He didn't. Okay. He sounded so hurt, so broken emotionally. I'm sorry I didn't read it that way. William could see in his eyes that he tried but failed. The sword was not meant for him. So you didn't come to fight off bandits then? Bandits? Marcus asked, surprised. Nonsense. One man doesn't have time enough in the world to chase off all the bandits in Freeport on his own. Where did you hear that absurd notion? Your brother, William replied, Villius. His mind must be slipping. He knew I came for the sword. I told him myself. He seemed keen to know exactly where I thought it might be. Well, he made no mention of a sword when he sent me to find you, just said you'd gone to handle bandits at this cave and that they'd probably killed you. Marcus nodded, eyes widening. Of course. That villain. He's a corrupt and unscrupulous man. No doubt he wanted the sword of McFinn for himself. He must have sent those brigands I dispatched at the cave entrance. I suspected they were lying in wait for me. Great. I guess that means we can go now, William said, turning to leave. A moment before we do, Marcus said as he placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. Yes? When you came to find me, did anyone come with you? William shook his head. And yet you made it to me, here in the center of this dungeon. Tomb, William corrected. Beg your pardon? It's a tomb, William said. Dungeons are where prisoners are kept and tortured. Well, yes, Marcus said, but tombs contain bodies. This had naught but a sword. A shrine? William asked. Who ever heard of a deadly shrine? It's a place of worship. They stared at each other for a long moment and then shrugged. I ask again, said Marcus, how did you, such a young boy, reach me here in the center of this rather unorthodox shrine on your own? I don't know, William said, trying to find some reasonable answer. Just lucky, I guess. This cursed place has claimed the lives of many men before you, each mightier than the last, and yet a child, a mere child, should survive its horrors on its own, should survive its horrors safely. I'm not that young and defenseless. I was able to get away from Captain Longshanks. The Captain Longshanks? And the Scalawag? Then it must be true. What? William asked blankly. It is you. You are the chosen one to You are the chosen one to receive this worthy blade. You have defeated Longshanks. I never said I defeated. You have bested this vile place where many more powerful than you have failed and have done so single-handed, and now you save me, a veteran adventurer. It can be no other way. You think so? William asked, wanting to be convinced. I know so. Go forward and collect your prize. You have earned it. William returned his blades to his belt and took bold steps toward the sword. The pillar of light hit him like a cleansing fire, burning away the adolescent and leaving a man in its wake. He raised his right leg and rested it upon the stone for support. Reverently, he took the hilt into his sweaty palms and spoke the oath that he had always heard heroes make in stories. I, William Overhill, do take up this sword, that I might use it to right wrongs, defend the defenseless, and spread goodness where evil prevails. I will use its power to make this realm and all realms a better, safer place. This I swear on my soul unto my dying breath. Then, with both hands firmly around the hilt, he pulled. And that is where I'm going to leave you tonight. Cliffhanger, what could happen? Who knows? Meanwhile, you need to get to bed. So, until next time, have good dreams and good night.